So welcome back. Quite a number of things happening, so quick and fast. But after the president's speech, Labour did put up a statement which many may have been aware of. So that statement, which was put up on the 31st of July, is titled President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's speech, not the silver bullet that Nigerians expected. And then they started out by saying, our review of today's broadcast by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu leaves us with the impression that the promises and assurances made by President Tinubu is not the silver bullet that Nigerians expected. The speech indeed appears to be out of touch with reality and anomalous with the hardship and suffering that most Nigerians are going through now. And then, if I can just fast forward to the second to the last paragraph there, which says, for many Nigerians, it is incomprehensible that the principal actors in the current government, including Mr. President himself, were clear in 2012 on the need to tackle the fundamental issues that brought about petrol subsidy. Those issues included the failure of previous governments to repair our national refineries and bring those behind the monumental subsidy sleaze to book. Today, these issues are swept under the carpet in President Tinubu's speech. Nigerians wonder what has changed. Well, not long after that, several messages went through that Labour may have put the planned protest in abeyance, but they came up much later and then say they are going ahead with the protest, and they went ahead and listed their demands, which you can see there. We'll go over them in the course of the programming as we progress. But we're joined now by two gentlemen to take a look at first some of the highlights of the president's speech. But first off will be what may be happening or what will be happening today, as Labour has maintained. Amaechi Asuguni is a former vice president of Nigeria Labour Congress. He joins us virtually from Port Harcourt. We also have Mr. Muda Yusuf, founder, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, also joining us virtually. He will shed light on those palliatives, if they could have some impact at all, or what kind of impact will they have. Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Yeah, good morning, Chairman.
All right, comrade, let me begin with you. All eyes will be on Labour across the country to see how do they proceed with all of this. But the government also had that meeting with Labour. Many suggest that they are reaching out, making efforts to ensure they at least meet Labour's demand, and something those efforts may or should count for something. But from Labour's standpoint, maintaining that this protest will go on suggests no, it doesn't. So what can you tell us about the current situation this morning? From what you said, it appears the protest will go on. So one, is that going to go on in spite of all entreaties from the government?
First, for purposes of clarity, I am the former deputy president of Nigeria Labour Congress, though I was vice president, but later became deputy. Then I will quickly say that the NLC action is irreversible to the best of my knowledge, even as of this morning. Workers are assembling at the centers, the pick-up point for the action. And I think government should pay more attention to the substance. The issue resulting to this protest should actually be attracting government than the protests of today or a few days. Because if we just look at Labour, we may be missing it. Don't forget, the population of Nigeria is over 200 million. Labour constitutes less than 15 million or so. So when you are addressing Labour and you forget that the subject matter is beyond the working people, these are salary earners. And then the attention even should be on more Nigeria. In fact, the government is even lucky that it's organized Labour that is planning protests, meaning the protest itself is organized. So we don't go back to where pocket of Nigerians who also have right to protest begin to institutionalize this kind of legitimate right of theirs, and then it may go out of control. So I think today is, for me, the Labour has made it a warning protest, counting the one today. It's after today, we will not know whether it's escalating beyond 1 day because they were not specific about days for the protests. But I know very well that the protests will go.
So is that to suggest that all of the meetings that has held between Labour and government didn't count for anything?
Yes, I think during the meeting, Labour tried to also bring alternative so that they are not just meeting for seeking government presentation. Labour also presented alternative like the compressed natural gas, the CNG stuff, which has been proven to be efficient alternative to petrol. But unfortunately, some of the effort made by government is more or less targeting infrastructure, targeting. If you watch Mr. President's speech the other day, that should be a summary of their response to Labour, and take the outcome of that speech as summary as the response to Labour. You will now know that the issue in question is not being addressed. But the cost of the hardship Nigerians are facing now is the removal of subsidy. And you have removed subsidy, no plan to put refineries to work, and in all the speech tests of Mr. President, we didn't see any paragraph that suggests that refinery will work in Nigeria. So for me, any palliative that is not considering refineries functionality is more or less too temporal and will not survive the hardship I cannot cure the hardship we are facing now. And as such, Labour is feeling unsettled. Labour is under pressure by members. Labour believe that if they don't do anything now, Nigerians may do it on their own.
These demands of Labour, immediate implementation in good faith of the resolutions with Congress jointly signed with government and TUC, immediate reversal of all anti-poor policies of government, including the recent hike in PMS price, school fees and VAT, fix our local refineries in Port Harcourt, Warri and Kaduna, release of 8 months withheld salaries of university lecturers and workers, accord appropriate recognition and support to the Presidential Steering Committee and the work of its subcommittees to put a stop to inhuman actions and policies of government. Well, the first two, you want immediate implementation. But about, okay, now you said including the recent hike in PMS. I know we spoke to the president of TUC some time ago where we did ask him, because that's part of what it was a first on TUC's demands. I would say, look, hasn't the horse bolted from the stable? Because if it's market forces that determine the prices, and he somewhat was passive, saying, well, yes, we realize that. But bringing it back here, does Labour actually think that government will revert and get back to the initial price? Because if you go down memory lane in history, that has never happened.
Yes, even Labour cannot be demanding for price to more or less status quo bearing. But the question is, if truly every Nigerian would be actually give their consent to removal of subsidy, if there is no concrete plan that suggests that government, in fact, if government is saying we no longer participate in the refinery functionality, we want private sectors to take over the sector in order that Nigerians' need will be met quickly. Because products that are in the public space are far cheaper than where government is involved. If that is their weakness, that government can no longer participate in the business, which investor are they now attracting to the sector? If not for Dangote, that people are still believing that only Dangote can survive the supply of Nigeria. That is not true. That is just making one man to actually inherit what few persons were sharing. And it's unacceptable because Nigeria cannot subject itself to one man market. Okay. That kind of monopoly is no longer friendly anywhere in the world. So you are not making the atmosphere friendly. You are not participating. It means that something is fundamentally wrong.
Well, Mr. Yusuf, while some Nigerians are trying to digest the highlights of the president's speech concerning palliatives, others don't know what to make of it all, even with the planned protests of labor, they say starting today, wondering if it will continue, or suggesting that it may continue after today. Give us your impression. What do you make of all that is playing out?
Well, thank you very much. The nature of protests is such that most times you cannot predict how it will end because labor was not specific about the number of days. And from experience, the longer the number of days, the greater the risk of losing control of the whole protests. And we know what the consequences are for businesses, especially small businesses. In commercial cities like Lagos and many other parts of the country, most Nigerians, particularly those in the small business space and those who are in the informal economy, they live practically on daily income. So if you have this kind of disruption, it will disrupt their activities, it will disrupt their incomes. And it doesn't take too much time for them to run completely out of money. And when things get to that point, you begin to see all manner of behaviors which could do a lot more damage, even to the citizens that we are trying to protect. So making the protest peaceful and keeping it as short as possible, I think is something that we need to stress in the interest of everybody, both of the economy and the citizens themselves. Of course, that will not diminish the effectiveness of the messaging that Labour is trying to put forward. The president has responded. Of course, he outlined quite a number of interventions, which are largely monetary anyway, which of course will bring some succor, which may not be very immediate. But my impression is that as they progress with the engagement, and I hope the engagement could also be accelerated, because if they had moved faster with the engagement, I'm sure we will not be where we are today. So if we go further and expand the scope of engagement to address many other issues that have been raised by Labour, I think that will help. Now we have seen intervention in the finance space, given concessional credits, which is of course very significant. The president is talking about 9% credit facility for small businesses, for medium businesses. 9% is highly concessionary because monetary policy rate now is 18.75. So if any business has the opportunity of a 9% interest, I think that is significant. Then the tenure of the funds that is being proposed now, we are talking of a tenure of almost 5 years, 60 months. You hardly can get that in any financial, any bank, any commercial bank. That is also significant. But I also take the point that in terms of the immediate issues, I think it is also important that government prioritizes its focus, because the immediate issues are really the issues of the high cost of food, the high cost of transportation, and of course the high cost of energy. And I must say that all over the world, government gives subsidies in various areas. So subsidy in itself is not a bad thing. What is bad is our own version of subsidy, which of course we all know the kind of damage it has done to the economy. So you can go back and refine that and come back with other forms of subsidy in the area of energy, in the area of transportation, in the area of health, in the area of education. You know, these are, and of course, in the area of food. Last year, 2022, globally, there was a subsidy of $1 trillion on energy, on fossil fuel specifically. You know, so that shows that even across the world, it's the same thing we have with farm subsidies in Europe, in America, the same thing with transport subsidies. All these things exist to protect the interests of the vulnerable segments of the society. That is the whole concept. And what the government is doing is to move away from this kind of subsidy that is vulnerable to abuse and to a lot of bleeding, and refocus it on something that is more beneficial. So it is that process that requires a much more robust engagement. Then there is also the policy approach to subsidy because of the palliatives. Because it is not everything that is actually about giving money. And we all know, you know, the challenges is part of the world when it comes to distributing money or distributing incentives. So it should also be looking, in addition to what the president has said, it should be looking in the direction of using policies, you know, tax incentives, tax breaks, fiscal policy incentives, tariff incentives, trade policy reviews. The policy approach is also very, very significant, and it's of course more systemic. And some of them can give even much quicker results. And it incentivizes the private sector to complement the efforts of governments to bring relief to the citizens. And let me give you an example. Right now, the import duty on buses and things like that is anywhere between 25 to 30%. So if the government comes up, for instance, with a 50% reduction in import duty on buses and all these smaller vehicles and all of that, the private sector on their own will respond. Companies will be able to buy more buses for their staff. The transporters will be able to buy more buses and put on the road. You know, state governments will be able to buy more buses. Local government will be able to buy more because they become cheaper. So we should be looking at also policy options in the delivery of these palliatives. The same thing can happen in the area of taxation. The same thing can happen in the area of our trade policy.
So for you, Mr. Yusuf, there is still many more room for implementation of policies. Is that what you're saying, essentially?
Exactly. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of room because what the government has done is good, but, you know, deploying policy, because policies has systemic impact. It affects everybody, you know? So that is the point I'm making. There's a whole lot of room to use policies, you know, to achieve some of these results. But this will come from, you know, this continuous engagement with labor and other stakeholders in the economy.
You have expressed your, you've expressed some of the concerns that people usually have about how protests could affect, I mean, especially when they go on for a little longer, how they can affect small businesses and the fears that small business owners could have, especially those who earn their income on a daily basis. What other concerns do you have, I mean, apart from that for small businesses? Do you have any, given the current climate that we're in with the Labour embarking on a protest today, or do you think that this is absolutely necessary?
No, the concerns I have is that, you know, many times these things are difficult to manage when it begins to expand. You know, yes, the police have said they are going to do a few things and all of that. But this is a very big country, and we have an experience, something, you know, like the NSAS and all of that. We all know how overstretched the security agencies are. So the concerns I have is the risk of massive disruption of both the economic and the social environment, you know, which will not be in the interest of anybody. I'm sure Labour too is not looking forward to a situation where there will be complete breakdown of law and order, so much that even innocent people will now begin to suffer. So that is why it's important to keep it short and have, of course, effective messaging, and so that we can move on with the engagement with the stakeholders and with Labour.
Comrade Asogone, is this just, I mean, for some people, they're looking at this protest. Well, Labour insists or continues to say it's a rally. They've said if they organize a rally, they can go on Nothing stops their rally, and they mobilize their members in many parts of the country. But I mean, I'm looking at the message which they sent much later to reiterate, the fact that I'm reluctant on what word to use now. But looking at this statement, it simply says protest. It says we have neither reconsidered nor suspended the nationwide mass protests. So it does appear that right now, even though the comrade president had used the word rally in the engagement with the government, this letter says very clearly what this is about. This is no rally. This is a protest. Is this just about a show of force on the part of Labour? Because people know that at the end of the day, you're still going to go back to negotiation. Labour is currently in negotiation with government. So there are a little amiss as to what this is about. Is this just a show of force on the part of Labour? Comrade, if you can hear me, please kindly unmute. I can't hear anything you've said, sir.
Yes, sorry. I just mentioned that protest in itself is a petition. So what Labour is doing is actually re-expressing itself to the extent that they are not satisfied with the approach of government so far on the matter. You know, when you are in a negotiation and the other party keep repeating himself on a daily basis, not providing any kind of solution that suggests that the outcome will actually be win-win, then one party will seem more disturbed, because as far as we are concerned, federal government believe subsidy is gone. Labour also believe that the hardship is continuing. And then in the midst of this hardship, what do they do? So I think Labour is more pressured than anybody else in Nigeria. So in the face of the negotiation, they are not seeing any plus. And I tell you, when it goes this way, their silence may mean defeat to their members. So they're coming to show this kind of expression to the public, to the world, even to the government itself, because Mr. President is not there in the meeting. So what they are also doing is for President to know that whoever you are sending to this meeting has not represented well to the extent of meeting the demand of Nigerians. And it's not just Labour, it's about the country interest. And whatever we do, no matter the consequence protest tends to actually present, we should also be looking at the consequence of government action, because whatever that happens afterward is caused by government. I believe there's no smoke without fire, and therefore, what has happened that is leading to this continuous hike in petrol price has affected everything in the market. Even business owners, no matter how they are not also selling at the point the turnover they actually would make in a day is no longer coming, because no money to patronize. I believe everybody is in this jeopardy, and the earlier we are collective in saying this truth, it will be better for Nigerians. Because even when government try to bring the option of, no matter the number of vehicles government may even want to participate to roll out to the road, the question is, where will they get their own fuel? They will still buy their fuel at that same price, and it means the price will still be high, because if it is not refined in Nigeria to the extent that you domesticate that product and use Nigerian currency to determine the price, you cannot get it fair. So the protest of today is, for me, is overdue, and I also thank them for the wisdom to use protest to initiate this warning and then come back to the table and see how government will change their own scheme of negotiation. Because the scheme of calm down is actually not a good way to address the economic issue, because we're referring to action of government that has triggered poverty. And then Labour is even helping the populace, because Labour, they are earning salary. One of the conditions Labour gives to federal government is that whatever palliative you are bringing, even though we don't believe in this monetary palliative that is too temporary, don't consider to give that palliative to salary earners. For me, it's a plus on the side of Labour to tell government not to consider those that are income earners in the scheme of that palliative, so that we now know what kind of criteria are they using to actually capture the real population that is affected by this action of subsidy removal. Because if you do it from the normal pattern they used to engage, eventually the same people that are working, the same people that are controlling the scheme will pack everything to themselves. So it shouldn't be a source of...
what I get from what you said is that the NLC, that's Labour, is doing this as a result of pressure. They feel under pressure to do this. Is that correct?
In addition to pressure, they are not satisfied with the outcome so far in this meeting.
Well, there's also the part of principle which you've raised. I think my colleague Chimley raised that with you. I didn't quite hear what your response to that was when he looked at some of the demands that Labour is making, talking about anti-poor policy, including the recent hike in PMS price. So there'll be questions as to whether or not Labour is with government on the removal of petrol subsidy. And I think when we say Labour, oftentimes I think we need to, in this case, I need to be very specific, the NLC, because it would seem that before now, other Labour unions, for instance, the Pengasen had, advocated for the removal of subsidies so that their own sector can, fully take off. So I really want to know whether Labour really understands or is with government with this question of removal of petrol subsidy.
Yes, NSC was the first to initiate subsidy removal with a very key condition to making refineries work. It is that condition that federal government don't want to hear. If not, NSC has been making this agitation of subsidy removal. It's a scam. It's even it's deepening the poverty state of Nigerians. And therefore, use the available resources you have, rechannel your resources to make refineries work. Because these refineries have been in place, workers have been paid salaries irrespective of these refineries. So what are they producing? If we are not productive conscious to the extent that we know that refineries that are meant to work are not working, and we are doing nothing, it will raise suspiciousness. So I think energy should also be focused. Why is Mr. President not saying anything about refinery? He should even tell us his reason. If he does not believe in government participation in the business anymore, then tell Nigerians the alternative to it. But to say we will not attend to refining our crude locally in Nigeria, the protest will be endless. Even when Nigeria Labour Congress failed to do it right, I bet Nigerians one day a group will legitimately engage to ensure that this protest is exercised. So it goes beyond NSC and federal government. It's about Nigeria versus government. So for me, NSC believes subsidy should be removed on the condition that refineries will work in Nigeria, not at the expense of importation.
Well, I said this to my colleagues in Lagos who also have questions for you.
Well, thank you, Mark. But indeed, but let's begin with this update from Kano State, still about the protests. And we have images coming in from Kano State where there's heavy security presence as labor union members begin to gather for a peaceful protest in that state, northwest Nigeria. Well, the protest is expected to begin now from the Kano State Library down to the Kano State Government House. I think there had been a release put out that the protest will begin 7 a.m., but they're gathering now, as you can see images right there. And of course, we're across the country to bring you images, live images from the protest spots across the country. But what you're seeing is from Kano State, where there's heavy security presence as labor union members begin to gather for peaceful protest in that state. All right, let me come to Mr. Yusuf now and just ask. So Labour is asking that refineries be fixed. In fact, it's one of the demands that has been consistent. 2 months ago, about this time, they were meant to go on a protest as well. I think it was on June the 7th. But eventually we had that meeting and there was this agreement signed by the TUC, the NLC and representative of the federal government. And, you know, the refinery bit was there. I think there were about, what, 7 demands or thereabouts. In the president's speech, he referred to, or he referenced at least 4 of those demands in his speech, but he left out the refineries, as has been said. But he also made that statement about saving 1 trillion naira as a result of the removal of fuel subsidy. A lot of people are asking, does it mean cash, real cash at hand, or he's trying to say that where we will have spent 1 trillion naira, which we didn't have anyway, on subsidies. But now that Labour is saying immediate fixing of refineries should work. In terms of the economic angle, let's imagine this is a business decision that the government should make. Would you advise subsidies should continue, because Labour is saying there should be a reversal of the hike in fuel price? Subsidies continue and government should fix the refineries. Does that make economic sense? I hope this is coming across well.
Well, it makes sense to, you know, stress the importance of refining petroleum products locally. It gives us a lot of savings, it creates a lot of jobs, and it also helps to, you know, provide a lot of feedstock to our manufacturing sector. But the challenge with the structure of refining up until now has been that the refineries are being managed by the public sector. They are managed by bureaucrats, they are managed by politicians. So rather than the refineries being an asset to the country, the refineries have become a huge liability to the country. And that is what actually brought us to where we are today. So the only way out is to ensure that we attract private capital, private sector expertise in management into the refining process, both in terms of attracting new investors into the refineries and also about ensuring that even the existing ones are done perhaps within a framework of public-private partnership. Because if you continue to say that the refineries will work under the previous dispensation, and don't forget, with the kind of subsidy we were running, there was no way that we can get private capital into that space. So if you are not getting private capital or private investors into refineries, if the public sector people that are managing the refineries don't have the capacity to manage it, is that not a crisis for us as a country?
Pardon me, Mr. Yusuf, I just want to follow up on this. Pardon me, Dr. Muda Yusuf.
The president was saying.
Right. Just quickly, I wanted to clarify the question. I'm asking, can we eat our cake and have it? Because Labour is asking for immediate reversal of the hike in petrol price, essentially meaning that subsidy should return. Labour is also asking that our local refineries be fixed. And I imagine it's still within the same funds available, perhaps 1 trillion naira, which we're not clear anyway if it's cash at hand. So can we eat our cake and have it? So keep subsidizing petrol as Labour demands while we're fixing refineries as well?
No, certainly not. But my understanding of what Labour is talking about is the last component of the hike in petrol price. You know, when the initial announcement was made, there was a movement to between 490 to 500 or so. So there was an engagement, there was a meeting. While that was going on, NNPC announced a further increase. I think that is what actually provoked, you know, some of these reactions. So my understanding is that Labour is asking that we should go back to where it was before the latest increase, while the engagement continues. And when the president was talking, because it's also not correct to say that the government is not doing anything about the refineries. If you look at the Petroleum Industry Act, part of the provisions in that act is to ensure a total reform and transformation of the oil and gas sector. And I've seen a document on this oil and gas advisory committee set up by the president which has a wide-ranging level of reforms with timelines. Although the president did not elaborate on that in the speech, but it's also not correct to say that nothing is being done in that space. This reform is also part of the process to revamp the whole refineries and to ensure that you have more private investors in that space. But to say that the refineries has to work under the previous dispensation is to continue to waste valuable resources of the government and of the people.
Okay.
And the president said in his speech, I'm not holding brief, that he was running away from jargons, market forces, GDP, and so on.
Right.
That if there is need to intervene, that the government will intervene, either in terms of this capping this oil price, this fuel price, or even the foreign exchange market.
Okay.
He said the government was ready to intervene.
Yeah, indeed,
so that we don't
came out
to market forces.
I mean, that part of the speech came out, and a lot of people held on to it. But as you said, it was conditional. There was if we need to intervene. So it's not quite clear that government will indeed. But quickly, let me ask Mr. Suguni, because you've raised some major issues. So for Dr. Yusuf, we certainly cannot eat our cake and have it regarding reversing the price, or at least cutting it down, returning some sort of subsidies while we're trying to fix the refineries as well. And I want to ask you, so what do you think the president or this government can do much more than what it has done, or at least in the speech of the president, that can further assuage labor? So we're clear on what the expectations are. So if we see it, we know that, okay, this is what labor wants, and government is indeed doing it. What more do you expect from government?
I think my focus is on what government is not doing. In as much we appreciate the little effort by coming to at least raise this concern with us that they feel the pains of Nigeria. Mr. President did acknowledge that. But the question is, where is the template for the program that will actually deliver this country from the quagmire we find ourselves? There's no template. So anytime you have a negotiation and there is no template from government as an employer of labor to show that to reform the petroleum sector, that is a long-term program that you need to define what will happen now at the short time. You need to also tell us what Nigerians tends to get in 2-3 years to come. Labor that is saying reverse. Why labor is saying reverse is because they are not seeing any template. If you tell me that you have removed this with the preparation to achieve this, and I see the process engaged, there's no way this process will be necessary. But labor is sensing that nothing is being done from the back. But it seems they are doing more on the table.
Yes.
Well, Comrade Suguni, if I could follow up on that, you have rightly noted that Mr. President's intervention in his speech reflects that indeed he feels the pains of the people. And if that is the case, really, would it be right for Labour to continue with this mass action, knowing that in some states there are plans already to roll out the palliatives? In fact, some have rolled out, and I can mention a few. Buses have been released in Rivers State. Ogun State has also rolled out a number of palliatives. And in Lagos, by tomorrow, in line with, or in fact today, the 2nd of August, in line with what the governor said, the commencement of reduction in transport fare has begun for both the private, for both the yellow buses and the government high-capacity buses. So doesn't this show government's good intention and the need for Labour to return to the negotiation table rather than the mass action?
In fact, the palliative itself calls for questioning. Even when states are actually trying to show support to Mr. President, it becomes more political and almost with no vision. That you set up a temporary palliative with no program in place to overtake the palliative. So how would people trust this kind of scheme? So the palliative they are doing now, in as much I appreciate Mr. President, who also want to employ the scheme of using the state, who may eventually use local government to get to the communities, unlike before, where people will sit in Abuja and they write a long list and apportion naira to it, and then somebody has become a billionaire. Now you want to involve the state to involve the communities. We don't have a problem with that. The question is, the palliative, how effective is the palliative? It's not viable, it's not reliable, it's not guided. And so it's unrefined, because it's like somebody saying, there is fire, just pour water and quench fire. Because of the hike in price of goods today, it's not being addressed. So even when you give money to the people, the same money you would have used to cure the palliative is the same money you are giving temporarily to few Nigerians.
So, Comrade Asuguni,
what happened?
Comrade, what approach would you rather have the government adopt in implementing the palliative program across the states?
If that would have come first, would have been initiation of very cogent program with regards to making our refineries work. And like our friend said, if government participation is even the key problem we have, then the question is, what effort is government making to even bring investors? You must play one of the roles. Assuming one of the trip, like the recent trip of Mr. President was to actually partner with ABC to come into Nigeria, and like they did in the communication industry. And today, communication is as cheap as anybody can afford it in Nigeria. If that was the agenda...
Comrade, you're talking about... Today, pardon me, Comrade Asuguni, if you can hear me. You're talking about the refinery. Some would say that's in the long term. I'm talking about the palliatives. What approach would you rather have the government adopt in implementing the palliatives? If you say that it's political and, you know, it's not going to achieve anything, some would are going to become rich by it, what approach would you, you know, require that the government adopt such that it can get to the vulnerable that really need it?
Yes, the approach they can employ, because they've made up their mind to go in that route. The question is, they should involve the community. The community leaders should be involved. In fact, if you leave me, I will say traditional rulers should be engaged in this process in such a way that names of Nigerians from rural areas who are not working, because we have issue with data. Because of the data problem of this country, you can see somebody's name can appear twice. So if they can employ the NIN, the BVM processes, every other identity, digital identity system that could stop duplication and then ensure that the rural area is the target for this action, it will help. But I still have issues, because the people that are working are also using their salary, larger part of their salaries now for transportation. And it calls for a bigger problem, because so the palliative scheme should focus on the rural areas, but at the same time, what must you do urban city to actually pushing the effect of the removal of subsidy, where the consumption of petrol is actually high?
All right. A very quick one, just before we exit this segment. Comrade, there are reports that in some states they will not be joining today's mass action, perhaps because of the signal that some palliative programs are beginning to be implemented in those states. What does this say about, you know, the labor movement's strength to proceed with the other key demands that it has tabled before government in its negotiation?
Yeah, you know, when protest of this nature is launched, it does not matter the state that fails to join the protest on the first day. If peradventure it continues tomorrow, the state will be, don't forget, NLC is an institution that have a constitution, and therefore no member can actually violate the decision of their National Executive Council, because it would have been a collective decision. So anybody who try to skip decision of organ may be penalized along the line, and somebody else may do the job that any chairman has failed to do. So for me, issue of compliance is constant. The effectiveness of the protest can be measured as they progress. And that is why the area government respond to them better for me, because if we watch to see the consequence, it may eventually announce more than we plan to see.
All right.
So I think the action should be respected by responding effectively by government.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Suguni. On a final note, Dr. Yusuf, your closing thoughts on this. I mean, there's the labor angle. Labor, for some people, represents just a little percentage of the Nigerian population, but there's also the bigger picture. What will be your closing thoughts on this, Dr. Yusuf?
Well, my advice would be that we need to accelerate the process of engagement with labor and other critical stakeholders. We need to prioritize the key pain points that Nigerians are worried about, namely the high cost of food, the high cost of energy, and the high cost of transportation. And we need to also partner with stakeholders in the private sector, to deliver on all these areas. Stakeholders in the agricultural sector, which the president alluded to, that there's already an engagement. We have private sector stakeholders in the transport sector. Government will engage with them on what kind of policies government can give them for them to also bring some value to this process. We should also have stakeholders engagement in the energy sector, because we cannot have an open-ended approach to these market forces.
Right.
Which is, I think, part of the things the president was alluding to.
Indeed.
That's a point we get to, that you have to apply a brake in the use of these market forces because of the social implications, of some of these things. So engagement is key.
Indeed.
Beyond labor, stakeholders in the private sector need to be engaged to see how the private sector can also support the government, to reduce this pressure.
And that's a fine place to leave it. Dr. Muda Yusuf, who's the founder and CEO of the CPP, that's the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you so much for your time, as well as Mr. Amechi Azaguni, who is former Vice President of NLC. Gentlemen, we appreciate your time on the program this morning. Well, we'll take a break now, and when we return, still other major issues to focus on, not forgetting that we're bringing you live updates from across the country as labor protests this morning. Stay with us.